could have been much stronger on COVID being airborne and the need for good steps to be taken in relation to removing the virus from the air. We see reports from all over the world about the use of HEPA filters.
Yes, we do, but not here.
Which take the virus out. In America, in New York, every single classroom has got a HEPA filter.
Really?
Every single classroom.
I've got them here,
New York.
I think. Is that what they are, those machines in the corridors? I think they're HEPA.
And there are CO2 monitors, which, because when people breathe out and...
well, it's a mark of how well ventilated a room is. The less CO2 there is, the better ventilated a room.
And they've got CO2 monitors in every classroom. And if you're a parent, you can go on the website and you can see the CO2 level in your child's classroom. If we look at what people are doing in Southeast Asian countries, where you can, when you go to the shops, you can see the level of CO2 in a monitor in the window. So that can help you to make a decision about whether or not to go into the shop.
And we're just doing what we did last time. We're crossing our fingers and hoping it goes away.
Absolutely. And we've had, I've just been astonished by the way in which the government has been almost in denial about the continuing existence of COVID. And some media organisations, they talk about it as if it's all over.
Well, we can agree that unless there is I suppose this is a big unless, isn't it? That a gross mutation, something really nasty, could still happen. You could still get a mutation that's vaccine resistant and virulent and deadly. But as things stand with this wave, specifically with this wave, even if huge numbers of people get it, the percentage of people getting seriously ill or dying is going to be a fraction of what it was pre-vaccination. So that's true. There's grounds for arguing we don't need to ramp up the volume to 10. We don't need to go Spinal Tap on it and go off the scale on our response. But to do nothing...
We're not even doing the sensible things.
We're not doing anything, are we? The government's done nothing.
We're not doing the...
You say, Boris Johnson, how are you responding to the fact that 1 in 30 people in this country currently have the virus? And his answer is cheese on toast.
And that we've still got hundreds of people dying every week.
It's not hundreds.
I think you'll find it is.
I think you might be right, because you're obviously paying more attention than I am, and I am guilty of at least taking my eye off the ball, but not of downplaying the current situation. I'll double check on that. I don't think it's hundreds, but as I say, you're clearly paying a little bit more attention than I am. Filters and ventilation. So, on what possible planet? And we're back to Jordan in a way. The people who resisted this for what did sound a little bit adolescent, it's not fair kind of reasons. Is that the only reason why the government isn't doing anything, or is there a case for defending their inactivity on scientific or social grounds? Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. And as I suspected, Pete is right, and there are still hundreds of people dying every week, 407 over the last 7 days of people who died within 28 days of a positive test. And that's, I think, in England alone. So what's the current advice if you've got it? I think it's stay at home if you have to. There's no particular requirement to stay at home, even if you've tested positive, is there? And this is a worry, of course. So you're looking at about 97 deaths a day on average, as many of you have pointed out to me. Thank you. I should have known that. I apologise. Actually, that's a dereliction of duty on my part. I should have been across that all along. I was for a while. But there it is, a mark of how easy it is to take your eye off the ball. And goodness knows we wanted to take our eye off the ball. Talking about Jordan's subconscious psychology, our subconscious psychology is to hope it's over and behave in a way that it means it is over, because that somehow it increases our sense and hope that it is over. But it ain't over. It ain't over till it's over. The fat lady isn't even gargling at the moment prior to coming onto the stage and starting to sing. This is a new wave, and it is huge, and it is a worry, and the government so far has done nothing. I'm turning into Bill Murray. I'm almost getting déjà vu. This is just bizarre. It's not going to be as bad, this wave, as previous waves have been, because we're vaccinated as a population largely. But why are they doing nothing? 1 in 30 people in the country. Do you want to have a go at explaining why they shouldn't? And of course, these days, you can only test positive if you can afford a test. 03456060973. What's going on? It's a question I asked almost every day during the first rounds of the virus. I'm very tempted to ask it again. I'll read you some text. Paul in Measham and then Anne in Nottingham. That's Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire, isn't it? Next door to each other. So, but I'm going to read some text first because some of them are anonymous for reasons that will become clear. James, this one isn't. They just like to be anti-authoritarian and feed off the attention they get for killing people's nans. That's the sort of superannuated 6-year-olds who never stop complaining about the relatively small inconveniences that we all should probably be taking again. Harge says, I'm a bit annoyed that many shops have now got rid of sanitizer at the doors, or if they have them, then they're empty. You and me both, actually, and particularly on the underground. I sometimes seem to be the only person in the station using the hand sanitizer. Mark in Cambridge reminds us that the mask is more to help others than it is to help yourself, and therefore becomes more important. This is a very interesting one from somebody who has asked to remain anonymous for reasons that will soon become clear. Morning, James. I hope you're well. Thank you for literally summing up my screams at the radio. I just wanted to sum up the uselessness and indecision and ineffectiveness of government and NHS management regarding how COVID has been for NHS staff. The government needs to change course fast. And he goes on, I want you to imagine walking into a room where a mother, pale and cyanotic, with O2 sats less than 50%, where the normal range is 95 to 100%. That mother has a small child staring on, and the mother is begging you for oxygen. You know that that child is going to be an orphan. That's how it's been for 2 years, and it's still happening now. How hard is it to wash your hands, get a vaccine, and wear a mask? Please keep it anonymous. So that's from someone in the front line of the NHS. And then another one. I haven't read this to the end yet, but I'm going to read it out. Hard one today, James. I tested positive on Thursday. The following day, I was supposed to be going on a stag do, which I attended at the races. I brought a mask to wear in the cab when we were inside, but after a while I stopped because I felt uncomfortable doing it, largely because of some comments from others within our group. This is where I wish the government had stepped in to do more, because even though I know it's wrong to attend, I was technically still allowed to, and I wanted to, even though deep down inside I knew it was careless. Good for you, mate. I think that honesty is really, really important, and I think it would take what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. I'm not a stronger man than me to say that I think I might have behaved similarly in similar circumstances. If I knew I had it, but I felt fine, and I had a really big social event coming up, I'm fairly confident I wouldn't go, but the temptation would be huge. Absolutely huge. And actually, to be honest with you, if my wife knew I had it, then even if my inner 6-year-old was keen to go anyway, there's no way that the family would allow me to. My daughters would be absolutely up in arms. The younger people never seem to, and they've suffered more than anybody, except clinically vulnerable, but the younger people never seem to struggle with some of the requests and the requirements that were being made of them to keep older people safe. 11:40 is the time. Paul's in Measham in Leicestershire. Paul, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, thanks for having me on, James, first off. I run my own estate agency, and I got 5 people who work for me, and all during lockdown, all my staff were required to get vaccinated. They all wore masks. None of my staff went off with COVID. Okay. And touch wood, we haven't had COVID since. And last week,
I can touch wood. Did you hear me? That's fantastic. I just literally did it. Thanks, Danny. Cheers, mate. Carry on, Paul.
See, just wanted to help you out. See? But about a week ago, one of my staff got COVID from their son at school.
Right.
And so I obviously did a bit more research, saw the numbers going back up, and have reintroduced mask mandates for my staff whenever we're doing viewings, because we see dozens and dozens of people a day.
Of course you
One
do.
of my staff members the other day had 57 viewings in a day on a rental property.
Good grief. That's a conversation for a different day. That's a topic there waiting to happen.
100%. But the fact is that we could be super spreaders. If we didn't take any precautions, we could easily spread it to hundreds of people within a week without it making a difference.
That's a good point.
And I just don't understand. We get abuse sometimes now in the last week since we've reintroduced it from some people who are like, why are you making us wear a mask? Why are you wearing a mask? This is ridiculous.
From customers, from potential clients.
Customers.
How did the staff take the decision?
They've been great.
Yeah.
They've never doubted. They all agreed. I was... for right or wrong, I made all my staff get vaccinated. it was a decision I made, and I said, if you want to continue working, we could get into whether that was right or wrong, but I felt it was the right thing to do because we deal with elderly as well.
Yeah.
And I wasn't willing to have that on my conscience. So the staff haven't doubted it for a second. But the fact is, because there's no government guidance on it, we get abuse, and we have nothing to point to.
No.
Other than that's our rules because we want to be
hang
safe.
on. Jenny Harries said on the television yesterday that you should be behaving, going about your normal life in a precautionary way. It's not exactly what you'd call a strong line of defence against abuse from members of the public, is it?
Exactly. And the thing is, I have a duty to protect my staff and to protect the business. We can't get staff as it is. There's a shortage of staff. And yet we seem to be willing to just let people catch COVID willy-nilly like it doesn't matter. It just doesn't make sense, everything going on in this country at the moment with the shortages we have and a government who don't seem to care about those shortages, and do nothing to keep the staff.
What are they doing? I don't know, I may even do this on tomorrow's show. What are they doing? If you said to a member of the government, if I was allowed to interview any of them, and I said, what are you actually doing at the moment? And I said, you're not allowed to mention writing cheques for Ukraine. What are they doing at the moment? What are they doing?
And they're not doing anything. That's the problem. They're trying to save their own backside from one potential embarrassment to the next. Their whole time is spent dealing with that and trying to come up with headlines. Maybe I'm naive or not, but the fact there was a new announcement of £1 billion to Ukraine, which I agree with.
Yes, of course, we all do.
Wrong.
No, we all agree with it, and we all know that any other prime minister would be doing exactly the same thing.
Exactly.
But it's not a red hair. It's not a very effective distraction, is it, from COVID rates?
Exactly. 100%. And it infuriates me.
I bet it does. I mean, I'm getting more infuriated as the conversation goes on, actually, because A, I'm cross with myself for not having kept a proper eye on the figures, and B, we're doing what we did at the first round of COVID, and the second and the third. We're sitting here in a degree, perhaps, of incredulity at the absolute absence of clarity and leadership. And it leads to things like this. Thank you, Paul. My daughter has just gone on a school residential trip, and I found out another pupil has a positive COVID test. School told the parent to send her, as the guidance is still to keep off school for 3 days after a positive test, which means my daughter is now exposed to COVID for 3 days. I tested positive on the day of my dad's funeral. I didn't have a choice other than to go. I kept away from everyone as much as I could and wore a mask. Was that irresponsible? I don't know. The thing is, James, if immunity wanes after 6 months of vaccination, and the majority of us have not had another booster this year, perhaps we're about to see what this wave will bring to the vaccine expired. As the parent of a 6-year-old brain cancer patient undergoing months of intensive chemotherapy, the lockdown hasn't really ended for us, and we continue to shield as best as we can. For him, the nurses on my ward have recently been instructed that they don't need to wear masks anymore, but they are continuing to do so because they don't see the logic in putting vulnerable children at risk. Which takes us back to the anonymous doctor earlier saying that, that the situation in hospitals, blaming it on management as much as government. It's quite a long text, and the technology in the studio is such I can't always read them right to the bottom, for which I apologise. I'll just press that button, and I should be able to. Here it is. The nurses on my bird pool. It's not just the public being relied upon to do what they think is right. It's medical staff as well, says Mark. The lack of leadership is so disconcerting. Clarity and leadership and clarity. Where are they? It's 11:45. 11:48 is the time. We'll speak in just one moment to Christina Pargle, who's the Professor of Operational Research at UCL and a member of Independent Say, someone whose counsel has been very helpful throughout the coronavirus crisis. And I don't want to keep her waiting, but a couple of quick texts on the questionnaire. I'm on holiday in Spain, says Lisa. Thank you for keeping me in your life, even when you're on holiday, Lisa. I'm touched by that. Masks are still compulsory on trains and buses and all flights registered with Spanish Airlines, a bit different from the UK at the moment. And this from Lynn. I've just been discharged from 2 weeks in hospital after a non-COVID emergency admission. The ward windows are open 24/7, HEPA filters, all staff masks constantly, visitors masks, temperature checks. I got fantastic care. But talking to the various staff, what hit me was the underlying trauma and the ongoing worry that they all feel, James. COVID is still very real, and I'm grateful that they did all they could to protect me from catching it while at my most vulnerable. So are we, Lynn. So are we. 11:49 is the time. Christina Pargle is on the line. I mean, you know what I'm going to ask you. How bad is the current wave, and what should we be doing about it?
Well, it's probably as bad as the previous two, so the one we had in January and the one we had in March and April. So we're probably not that far off the peak now. But again, it's loads of people off sick from work, more people in hospital, and there will be more people dying as well. And what worries me more about what we should be doing about it is it's not so much about how do we get out of this wave. I mean, this wave, it's probably too late to do much about it. But it's how do we prepare for the next one?
Yes.
Because the next Omicron variants are already growing. There are already ones people are worried about in India and Germany. So, how do we not be in this situation in September and then January and then next April? That's kind of what I want to see us talking about.
And what would you like to see happening?
Well, a focus on just fundamental prevention of transmission, just making it harder for it to infect people. And that's about clean air indoors. We know that's really important. We've known it's been important for 2 years now. And what's frustrating, people get saying, oh, it's too late for this wave. And they're not doing anything. But we now know, I think now we can be pretty sure we're going to get wave after wave. So if we don't start, we're never going to finish and we're never going to get there. So I think that's one thing that kind of requires investment and infrastructure, and it's not something you can do as an individual. And then things like increasingly immunologists have been calling for more research into better vaccines. I mean, our vaccines have been really, really good, but they're not good enough at preventing transmission,
Sure.
So how do we get to that stage? Why are we not still, putting lots of money into that? So I mean, those are two things.
What about individual behaviours? I don't know if you saw Jenny Harries on the telly yesterday morning, but I can tell you the phrase that she used was people should go about their normal lives, but in a precautionary way. Is that helpfully clear?
Well, it's just this kind of attitude that everything's on you.
Yes.
And I just don't think it's helpful. So yes, yes, that in some ways, because the government has abdicated any responsibility, that's all we can do, right? Is look after ourselves and our loved ones. So, I do still mask in public spaces and so on. But, is it sustainable to continue to ask people to do it all on themselves when there are big structural solutions that we could do, like I just mentioned on vaccines and air quality? And another big one is sick pay. The responsible thing to do as an individual, if you have COVID, is to stay home.
But that message, I mean, even, people can't afford to, you're quite right, but neither are they really receiving the message that they might want to. So I don't think people are even doing the calculation in a lot of cases, Christina, and working out whether they can afford to take time off when they get sick, that we've created a sort of a cultural acceptance that you probably do go to work, whether you can afford it or not. There's no real sense that I've got people getting in touch with me now. They've got children on school trips with people who've tested positive. I've got one here whose daughter was tested positive, told to go to work wearing a mask. She's a waitress. We're not even getting to the question of whether I can afford to stay at home if I've got it, because people have been encouraged to go out when they have. Yeah. I mean, of course, some people can't because they're just too sick. I think for a lot of people for whom it is... You said, to be clear, you said sick, not thick, then. Thick. Yes. No, I know. Because it's not a great phone line, and you're talking about people who are staying at home. You're not talking about people who are going out with it because they're too thick to realise what they're doing. They exist as well, but you're far too diplomatic to draw our attention to them. No, and it's not about being thick, is it? No. As you say, it's about being given the right information and the ability and the encouragement. Yeah. And from our leaders, we're not seeing any of it. I mean, Jenny Harries, on the one hand, says wear a mask, on the other hand, says I'm not wearing one. That's not good public health messaging. I mean, are you surprised? And I know this is a bit more personal than professional as a question. Are you surprised that this is all? Because I'm not, just to put it out there. I think there's almost a grim inevitability with the current administration in place that once again, the government policy would be to cross their fingers and look the other way while sort of pretending that people are supposed to use their common sense, which was actually government policy at one point. Common sense, whatever the hell that means. Are you surprised that we're looking at this very familiar picture once again? Disappointed. Yeah. How's that? Because I think, now we're in our third wave of the year and we're halfway through the year. And what I find, and already, Jenny Harries will talk about the autumn wave as if it's a certainty, but it is a certainty. You just think that the attrition on people leaving the workforce through long COVID, the added delays to NHS care, the disruption to education, the fact that teachers and healthcare staff have the highest rates of long COVID, that's not sustainable if every wave takes out a percentage of your population.
So from an economic perspective, if nothing else, you'd think that you would move away from this.
And if you have to sell it to them as an economic policy, then sell it to them as an economic policy. But please just do something, is the message that I'm hearing, really. What is the latest on the relationship between vaccinated people and long COVID? Do you know? Sorry, I've ambushed you with that question. I was just curious.
No, yeah, so the ONS Infection Survey actually did a study on it a couple of months ago now, and they showed that if you've had 3 doses of vaccine, so like most people in most adults in the UK right now, you still have about an 8% chance of developing long-term symptoms. So it's quite high.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people, that will then resolve, but you might still have symptoms for, 4, 8, 12 weeks. I mean, it's not trivial. And for some people, they don't get to go back to work. And so unfortunately, and I think Professor Danny Altman from Imperial has written really well about this, he's done lots of long COVID studies, is that vaccines have not solved long COVID in the way people hope that they would. So that is the problem. And
they're not acknowledging that, really, because, well, who knows why. I'm not going to hold you to this, and I'm not going to keep you any longer, except to say 2 things. The first, lots of people are asking me to thank you personally for all your work and effort during this crisis, so I'm more than happy to do that. And secondly, after I bid you farewell, I'm going to go through Sajid Javid's Twitter account, the Secretary of State for Health, and try and find the last time he tweeted about COVID. Do you want to take a guess on when that might have been? I haven't checked. It might have been this morning, so I could make a complete Herbert of myself. But do you want to take a guess on when that might have been?
I don't know, end of Jan.
I don't think you're being unduly pessimistic. Christina Fargle from UCL, who has lots of people, including Julian Suffolk, one of my regular texters, who has a clinically vulnerable son whose care has been her priority throughout this saga, asking me to thank you personally for all the work that you have done. Professor of Operational Research at UCL and a member of Independent Sage. I'm going to do that. Don't let me forget, but I've had Kim and Anne on hold for such a long time. I'm going to take their calls first, and then we'll have a look at Javid's Twitter account, see the last time he tweeted about COVID. Kim's in Maidstone. Kim, what would you like to say?
Yes, hello. First time caller to you.
Welcome.
But I listen to your station all the time.
Fantastic.
The bit that worries me is, there's so many, but one of them is the common sense element.
Yes.
It's like they throw that word out there as if it's like our sight or our hearing.
Yes.
Common sense is incredibly personal.
Of course it is. Do you know who I always think of when they mention common sense?
What's that? Who's that?
The man who put a firework up his bottom during the football last summer.
Oh, really?
In the middle of Leicester Square. How could you possibly have missed that? It was all over the show. I always think, well, there he is, using his common sense with a firework up his fundament. Carry on, Kim. Sorry, I ambushed you slightly there.
That's okay. My daughter's a hairdresser, and when COVID hit, unfortunately, we lost my mother-in-law.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What my daughter did was she didn't die from COVID, but COVID had a massive impact on how the family obviously dealt with her passing and what have you. But what my daughter did, she built a salon in her garden.
Gosh.
Because she wanted to treat her clients the way that she would hope I'd be treated, because I'm clinically vulnerable. And Lottie continued throughout all of that time to abide by all of the rules, despite her partner doing the opposite.
Oh, no.
And this eventually came between the two of them. I do believe this is what made it fail in the end, because they literally grew apart. And I'm sure she's not the only person out there. But what it does show is that no matter how much information you put out about COVID and the deaths and all the figures, you are not going to change certain people. And I don't know that
I don't know that we are putting out enough information.
No, we're not.
To arrive at that conclusion. I don't know what your daughter's partner's particular bugbear was, but was he anti-mask or was he anti?
No, it was anti being locked down, and I need to get out and do things, and she didn't. She stood by everything. She didn't go and put herself in
sad.
Any of those. It's life, isn't it? But
it is, yes.
At the end of the day, they obviously won't be together. They've been together 8 years, but what I mean by that is that we need to obviously be prepared for the next time that something like this is going to hit, and none of us know now when it'll be.
Well, this is the bit I'm taking away from Christina, is that no one is prepared. Well, I'll find out when the Secretary of State for Health last tweeted about it, but there's no sense at all of leadership here, is there?
No, Absolutely none. And do we honestly trust that leadership now?
No.
You know, I would trust, I have to. I think you have to believe in something. And I definitely wouldn't be voting for them, trust me. But I would like to trust that they will be getting the right information out at the right time for people.
No, sorry.
But they're not.
No, they're not.
I do agree with you. They're not going to. But
that's all we've
the
got.
thing is, it's all we have. We don't have anything else right now. And I had to fight to get my injections.
Did you?
Because literally had to fight for them because I take a lot of opiates and it means that my immune system's compromised.
Right, you are.
King's was saying yes. King's College Hospital GP was saying no. And so I really had
that's
to fight
clarity
for it.
again, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Kim, I'm sorry for everything you're going through. I'd be clearly very philosophical because you've said a couple of times that's life, but it doesn't mean that people can't have sympathy for what you're dealing with on the domestic front and indeed on the medical front. But those two words, clarity and leadership, which I honestly thought we'd wave goodbye to. I thought we waved goodbye to clarity and leadership a long time ago, but reminding each other of their absence from governmental discourse. We're back, aren't we? Oh boy. Listen, I don't pay enough attention to be certain that he doesn't make a speech about it every other day. But you've got Jenny Harries from the UK Health Security Agency telling people to go about their normal lives, but in a precautionary way yesterday. Still a little bit unclear, perhaps, about what that means. Sajid Javid, as far as I can tell, June the 26th, he tweeted about 2 Omicron-adapted vaccine candidates from Pfizer and BioNTech. But that's nothing to do with governmental guidance on how we should be behaving at the moment or what they are doing to minimise future waves. I'm live on the radio at the moment, in case you hadn't noticed, so I can't... I suppose I could. Could I just sit here scrolling through Sajid Javid's Twitter account looking for the last time he provided some sort of policy announcement? They're all shaking their heads, but, you know, it's my instincts that have built this programme into the behemoth of broadcasting history that it is today. I think sometimes you're going to have to... No, so he went to the Bromsgrove parade, Bromsgrove parade on June the 26th. 2-year wait, nothing there. So I don't know what the government guidance is currently on dealing with either the current wave or preventing future ones. And if you think the coronavirus call-in was a little bit Groundhog Day, wait until you hear about what's coming up next. Brexit. Keir Starmer's turn now to try and solve the riddle wrapped up in the enigma, wrapped up in the conundrum. And I mean, I know roughly what he is going to say, but he hasn't said it yet. So we will have a little look at the detail of this looming speech. But the bottom line is that he's not going to say the sort of stuff that what you might call the Remoaners would want to hear. And I don't know who's not. I mean, if you're not a Remoaner now, then you've probably lost the power of cogent thought, haven't you? You're enjoying this, are you? And even the current fuel costs would be considerably lower if we hadn't deliberately tanked the pound 6 years ago and still essentially continue to deal with the consequences of that. But here's the challenge that Keir Starmer faces. His calculation is that accusations of wanting to rejoin the European Union would still be electoral kryptonite. Right? That is the calculation. We can, and indeed we will, talk this hour about whether or not he's correct, but I don't know that any of us actually have the qualifications to answer that question. You can look at the polling, but the polling only ever tells you half the story. You can look at polling that says, you know, X% of people are happy with the way Brexit is going, almost all of whom are probably liars. But people who are unhappy with the way that it's going may not yet realise. In fact, lots of them probably don't realise that it couldn't ever really have gone any differently. So you're going to have lots of people who are unhappy with Brexit, but who are blaming... Was it Suella Braverman who blamed the civil service for it yesterday? It's all the civil services. When they talk about a Remainer bias in the civil service, which they will do increasingly, they're talking about a fact bias. Because outside politics, where you don't have to care about ideology or propaganda, it's a fact bias. So it's a bit like saying, can you pick up that very, very heavy sofa over there? And a civil servant turns around and says, well, no, I can't. and then you attack the civil servant for not being able to pick up the sofa. And they're very weight biased, those civil servants, with their refusal to carry heavy sofas. I literally can't pick up the sofa. I mean, it's the laws of gravity. You're so biased against gravity. Bloody civil servants, biased against gravity. Could you throw that apple into the air and make sure that it never comes down again, please, civil service? No, I can't. Also, why would I bother trying? How many apples do you want me to throw into the air before you accept the discovery of Sir Isaac Newton and acknowledge the existence of gravity? To which Suella Braverman replies, "Oh, down with you Remainers, you pesky Remainers. Can I get an interview in the Daily Telegraph, please, blaming gravity on the civil service?" Yes, of course you can. Here you go. On your crack. Daily Mail still carrying that ludicrous little graphic, "Return of the Remainers." Well, it's about flipping time. But who are they? Who are these Remainers? Keir Starmer doesn't want to rejoin the European Union. Or rather, he knows that we should, but he also knows that it ain't going to happen. There's no electoral gain to come yet. Well, this is my opinion, actually. I'm doing what I occasionally do, and I'm presenting my opinion as the unalloyed, unchallengeable gospel truth. Maybe you think that he should be doing more to make clear the case for rejoining the single market. But the point is that today he isn't going to. He is not going to. Sadiq Khan has done so. In fact, he did it on Monday night of was it last Monday we did that? Was it last Monday we did the State of London debate? Tuesday. He did it last Tuesday on stage with me at the O2. I think that was the first time he broke cover. Theo got very excited about it because Starmer and Sadiq Khan are very close and he's a frontline Labour politician, but he's not going to be fighting a general election anytime soon. I got less excited than Theo about that. Tobias Ellwood and Sadiq Khan, as far as I can tell, are the only sort of vaguely household name politicians who, from either of the two major parties, who have essentially called for a return to the single market or the customs union. Obviously, the SNP inhabits a unique place in this conversation, and similarly, the Liberal Democrats have been pretty clear about their position on this. But Keir Starmer is going to essentially campaign moving forward under the slogan "Make Brexit Work," which is open to the accusation that as fatuous, meaningless slogans go, it's right up there with "Get Brexit Done." I will defend him against that accusation, up to a point, Lord Copper. And the point to which I will defend him is this. I think he's right. I don't think he can yet. So here's what I think is going to happen. Starmer will do his best if, in the event that he wins an election, which is far from a foregone conclusion. There's also a possibility he won't even be leader of the party by the end of the week when Durham police hand down their findings. But let's work upon the principle that he will be around to enact the plan, the Brexit plan that he is announcing later today. He will do his best to undo some of the damage that Brexit has done. Brexit in general, and also Brexit in particular, the ludicrous deal negotiated by the ludicrous Frost with the ludicrous lordship. So and I think at some unspecified point in the future, you will be able to turn to the British people and you will be able to say, this is as good as Brexit gets. This is as good as it gets. Keir Starmer's calculation today is that he can make it a bit better than it currently is. I'm not sure I agree with him for two reasons. The first is that the European Union are not going to reward Keir Starmer, if he becomes Prime Minister, for not being Boris Johnson. That there isn't a sort of emotional legacy, I don't think, that we get to enjoy. That the European Union will continue to treat us like a trading rival and a third country. I don't think, I could be wrong, I hope I'm wrong on this, but I've hoped I've been wrong about everything I've ever said about Brexit, and it hasn't happened yet. So I hope I'm wrong about this, but I don't think there's going to be any bonus from the European Union negotiators in response to Keir Starmer taking over, despite his well-established history of understanding the benefits of membership and his relatively hard work to bring about a second referendum, because as anybody who's ever been near a building site will tell you, measure twice, cut once, which is what we should have done with the referendum and what Keir Starmer passionately believed. But he lost that fight. and so he moves on. Only your sort of tabloidy hooligans and Brexit denialists and unicorn collectors will still be pretending that the fact that he supported a second referendum has any bearing whatsoever upon what Labour policies will be moving forward. He, unlike some of us, accepts that defeat, accepts that loss, and recognises, rightly or wrongly, that he cannot campaign on rejoining the European Union, right? So what is he doing instead? He is announcing 5 ways in which he will improve upon what the current situation currently is. He knows, and I know, that it is never going to be anywhere near as good as membership itself. And that's why some people are very unhappy with him. Some people are very much of the view that he should be already outlining the inevitability and indeed the desirability of rejoining the European Union. Now, I disagree with that. I wish I didn't. Again, I just think that the calculation is still there until, and people hate this because it essentially casts them as sheep who've been herded into a ludicrous position without even realising it. But until the owner of The Sun and the owner of the Daily Mail and the owner of the Telegraph and the publisher of the Spectator, until all of these people put their hands up and say, we're really sorry, we've essentially done, what was that thing called? Not PPE. What was the stuff called where you got sold something and then you got a refund years later? PPI. Brexit's PPI. And until the people that sold you PPI stand up and say, we're really sorry for selling you PPI, we can't actually give you a refund, but we can certainly stop trying to pretend that it was a really good idea, and we can all get on with the business of undoing the damage done and the money lost by flogging you all this PPI. So until Rupert Murdoch and Viscount Rothermere and Paul Dacre and Andrew Neil and I don't know who edits. I don't know who was editing The Sun at the time. The Gallagher bloke at the Times who pulled the story after Downing Street rang him up. Or until all of these people put their hands up and say, sorry, we flogged you an absolute dud, then it's not going to be sellable to the British people. Not when you've got the massed ranks of the British media, including these weird new television channels that have been set up by Brexit supporters because they need an alternative reality for the people still swallowing the Kool-Aid, still chomping on the unicorn steaks. It's never going to happen until it becomes absolutely irrefutable, until you are having your face rubbed in the reality of it, and the reality is as good as it gets. So Keir Starmer's not doing it. He instead is pledging to improve it, to make Brexit work, and there are some areas in which he can. I'd call it baby steps, and I think it's probably the correct approach. However, I am more than happy to have a debate about that today, and that's what I would like to do next. Should Keir Starmer continue on this very, very cautious path, whereby he is ruling out joining the single market, never mind rejoining the European Union. He's ruling out being more like Norway. He's going, I mean, a little bit more Switzerland, although nowhere near as far as Switzerland in their relationship with the European Union. And his calculation is, I believe, and I don't know this, that when you get to a point where you can reasonably claim that this is as good as Brexit will ever get, then you can begin a conversation about whether we should move towards undoing it completely. So here you go. I haven't done this for a while. What do you think about Keir Starmer's refusal to contemplate rejoining the single market, never mind the European Union? 0345 6060 973. Given that the current government is built upon Brexit, should the current opposition be built upon undoing it? I think I've earned the right over the last few years to suggest that my views on Brexit are quite well established and quite well known, and my understanding of the benefits of membership of the European Union has grown with every passing year. But I still don't think, if I was leader of the Labour Party, that I would campaign on a rejoining ticket or a join the single market ticket. I'd love you to tell me why that's wrong. Or, of course, why you think Keir, reluctantly, no one's going to be, and this is Keir Starmer's problem in a nutshell, no one is going to be enthusiastically cheering for this level of caution. And yet you've still got people enthusiastically cheering the idea of turning our country into the first in history to impose economic sanctions on itself. So while people continue to cheer a proven law-breaking liar, does Mr. Caution, Mr. Careful, actually end up doing more harm than good by offering up a reluctant acceptance of what the law-breaking liar has done and a promise to improve it? What do you reckon? So, straight up question, Starmer has ruled out rejoining the single market or the customs union, completely ruled them out. We're going to find out what he's hoping or promising to achieve, but the key point is he's not going near it. No single market, no customs union, no rejoining the EU for Keir Starmer, regardless of what right-wing newspapers may pretend or Boris Johnson may lie about in the House of Commons and elsewhere. What do you reckon about that as a policy for the next generation of Labour politics? 0345 6060 973. It is 12:19. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question is pretty simple. Keir Starmer ruled out completely any return to the single market or the customs union. His problem politically is everybody knows that he knows we should be. Or at least he knows, you know that he knows, and he knows that you know that he knows that we would be a lot better off in it than out of it. But politics is about the art of the possible. And he doesn't think that is a possible platform to campaign on at the moment. I'm inclined to agree, but I wish I didn't. Mark's gone further. I've just cancelled my Labour Party membership as a result of this, says Mark. But I think you get it to the point where you can say, realistically, this is as good as Brexit is ever going to get. Forget Rees-Mogg with his ludicrous 50-year promises and 100-year projections. This is as good as it gets. And we may already have reached that point, but that is still up for discussion. This is as good as it gets. Then you start the conversation about whether you stay there or move. Richard's in Bracknell. Richard, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello,
we spoke last time about the takeaway.
Go on.
About how Boris Johnson has said about Starmer that he's going to take away the Brexit away from you.
Yes, that's right. Sorry, I thought you were talking about your dinner.
And
he is. He's going to do that either way, though. So Starmer is almost trying to prove that he's not doing the thing that Johnson is lying about him doing. You try and diffuse a liar, you're on sticky wickets already, aren't you? Really?
Yeah, and what he's done is he can't criticise Brexit. So recently, I think Mar asked the question of Yvette Cooper about, are we better off inside the single market? And she said, we're not joining the single market. Now, what Starmer should do now is turn that takeaway around. And what he should do is he should say all of the advantages of joining the single market. Right. He should say if we were in the single market, the Northern Ireland problem would be solved, the trade imbalance would be solved.
Labour shortage.
Through all of them.
Labour shortage would be solved. Trade imbalance.
And then say,
but we're not going to do that.
But we're not going to do that.
That's really interesting.
So what that does is all of a sudden there's no battle between is it a good thing or a bad thing. We're saying the single market's a great thing, but we can't go in there. Now the next question will be why.
Yeah.
And this is what he'll say. He can say two things here. He can say, look, why people voted leave, there was a lot of reasons for it. Mm. But the one thing that did come across was they wanted to stop freedom of movement.
Mm. Well, they wanted to stop other people's freedom of movement. I'm not sure they were ever entirely clear that they'd be sacrificing their own and their children's and their grandchildren's potentially. But yeah.
So he could just say categorically, we can't join the single market and have freedom without. So we can't join the single market. The other thing that you can say, which is absolute kryptonite, is you can say, look, Leave might not have told you this, but we all told you that there would be an economic hit.
Yeah.
So you did know what you were voting for. So there will be an economic hit.
This is quite tricky. So you're saying to people, you got what you wanted.
Yeah.
This is what you could have won. Basically, you are. This is what you could have won. What show is that? It's not Bullseye.
Bullseye.
Is it Bullseye? So basically, Keir Starmer needs to be like Jim Bowen.
Yeah.
I like
this.
So
what will happen now?
It's bolder than what he's currently doing, isn't it? It's bolder because he's showing them the rabbit and then saying you can't have it because you voted not to have the rabbit. You voted for Jacob Rees-Mogg's cast-offs.
Yeah. And so what you've got now is instead of us being patronising, us Remainers, saying we don't know what we voted for, we're actually saying you did know what you voted for.
But that's more patronising because you know that they didn't. So you're being passive-aggressive and patronising at the same time, Richard.
Okay.
Because when you told them there was going to be economic damage, they didn't believe you. They called it Project Fear. So you can't now say, oh, well, you knew you were going to be poorer because we told you that you were going to be poorer because they said that we were wrong. They said we were lying. So I'm not sure what's more patronising, pretending not to understand what other people did or pointing out what other people did even when they don't want you to.
Well, hopefully what that will do is you'll get the people out of the woodwork saying, well, no, I'm quite happy with freedom of movement. and others in saying, well, I voted for Norway.
Yeah. And that still hasn't happened, has it, oddly? I mean, that idea that Remain meant one thing and Leave meant 17.4 million different things. I like a lot of what you said, actually. I think it might be a bit too... If I say sophisticated, I'm going to sound patronising. I don't mean it's a bit too sophisticated for the electorate. I mean, it's a bit too sophisticated for effective messaging. So you do the Jimbo and you say, have a look at what you could have won. And while they're oohing and ahhing over the speedboat, you explain, well, you couldn't have that, though, because you believed Farage and his disgusting posters. But you knew what you were doing, and that's why the cost of fuel's gone through the roof, much higher than it would have gone, even though it would have gone up. It's a lot higher than it would have been pre-Brexit, without Brexit. I just don't know. Do people... I mean, you're rubbing their faces in it while you're pretending that they asked you to. I don't know, but I like it. I possibly even prefer it to what Starmer's currently doing. Thank you, Richard. Always a pleasure. Chris is in Prestwick. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First-time caller.
Welcome.
I think we're crying out for some stability. There's so much uncertainty. Things are going to get possibly even more worse than they are just now, but then we can build up slowly. Taking a kind of seesaw in, out, hokey-pokey approach is just going to create more madness, and we've already got a mad government, so let's please just get on the straight and narrow for a while if we can, and then think about it.
Well, yes, and the idea that he could do anything different is a little bit naive, I think, again, without wanting to patronise anybody. If he announced now that we're joining the single market, all of the lying propaganda merchants that sold Brexit to the people would redouble their efforts. They wouldn't roll over and go, oh, thank goodness for that. He's going to be the one to get us out of this enormous hole that we've thrown the country into while pretending that we were actually building it up.
Yeah. We need sensible government. We need a sensible approach to get ourselves out of this mess, and going back into a head-on-head in-out argument I don't think it would work.
What about the Richard, the last fella, this idea of showing people what they could have won? So reminding them that, look, single market membership would solve the problem in Northern Ireland. It would hugely alleviate the labour shortages. It would probably have a positive impact on the pound, which would immediately bring down the price of fuel. But people didn't want that, or people prioritised getting rid of mythical foreigners more than they prioritised economic, or they did not. So this is what you could have won, but you can't have that, so we're going to do this. And you give them, because what he's not doing is racing to the bottom in the hope that when people realise how awful it is, they'll start clamouring to climb out again. He's going to make it as good as he can, because he's a responsible politician. If he becomes Prime Minister, he's not going to make the country even worse in the hope of securing short-term electoral gain, like some I could mention. What would that do? I mean, I don't know enough Brexiters, except through work, to know. I don't even think they're ready to admit that it's a disaster yet, a lot of them.
No. And I'm certain the business challenges and the travel challenges and all of that, I mean, you can't unpick what's happened in the last 3 years. And
God, it's so
there's no magic wand. I don't have the answer. I just think we need a sensible approach.
And that's the point, acknowledging the reality of the United Kingdom, which is that a significant number of people, a small majority of voters, thought it would be a good idea. And although they probably don't think it would, I don't think you'd get a small majority for that now. You do have that democratic argument to be made, although I don't think a democratic vote is a democratic vote if the population is criminally ill-informed, as our population obviously was, and I include myself in that, lest anyone think I'm being rude about them. I wasn't qualified to vote in the referendum. I am now, but I wasn't then. And I wonder whether some people actually need to see what it looks like before they are qualified to vote in a referendum, which is when you have people like Suella Braverman popping up claiming that the civil service is biased against gravity. And she's someone who said, I'm pretty sure I've got this clip actually from Question Time not long ago. Suella Braverman this weekend accusing civil servants of being biased against gravity or Brexit. I'm pretty sure she thought that the European Union was going to end up paying us money. Did I dream it?
You're absolutely right. And this figure of 50 billion doesn't have any legal basis whatsoever. It's been manufactured. And it doesn't seem likely that there will be such a bill for £50 billion. It's part of Project Fear. health warning, don't believe it. We pay into the European Investment Bank, and so actually we're going to get a windfall from leaving. So I think that the scaremongering about having to pay to leave is just not true. We have a lot to gain. Our best days lie ahead, and we're going to be enjoying the freedoms and enjoying the benefits that we gain from leaving.
Well, I mean, there was a Brexit divorce bill. She claimed not only that there wouldn't be, but that we would actually somehow get paid money by them. And that was her grasp of the legal situation. And she's now the most senior lawyer in the land, I think. Is that an apt description of the Attorney General? So I don't know what you do. How do you fight against this level of ignorance, deception and propaganda, even now? That's the same person who this weekend accused the civil service of being biased. Which is a bit like accusing them of being far too much in favour of gravity. It is 12:30. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. It's 12:32, and after a very slow and sticky first 20 minutes on the programme, the rest of the show has absolutely flown by. Remarkable. I just give you a quick insight into what I do. On air and on Twitter. I think I go a little further on Twitter than I do on air, but not much further, because I think that would be disrespectful almost to you. When I accuse Johnson of lying, I used to think long and hard about that. I mean, because it's a nasty word, lie, particularly when you're talking about a Prime Minister. But I don't anymore. There was a ludicrous exchange on Sky News this weekend when a paper reviewer described him as a pathological liar, and the presenter, who looked quite young, it's not someone I'd seen before, sort of asked her not to or wound it down as if it's still a matter of opinion that Boris Johnson is a liar. I mean, a serial liar. It's not a matter of opinion anymore. It's a matter of fact. It's not an opinion. It's counting. So this morning, literally 2 hours ago or just over, I wrote the obvious lie that Johnson didn't know about specific allegations against Chris Pincher is a remarkable but inevitable defence when you think about it, an appalling dereliction of duty and a betrayal of alleged victims, but it's the best his defenders have got, because he was obviously lying. There's no earthly way that somebody gets appointed to a job without the person making the appointment knowing about some of the allegations that he is facing, specifically as well. So the only question then is, how long is it going to take before they have to do a reverse ferret on this one and admit the truth? LBC's Westminster editor has been at this morning's lobby briefing, and he can answer that question for us. How long is it going to be before they admit that he was aware of at least some of the specific allegations levelled against Pincher, Ben Kentish?
Well, James, they already have. The line has shifted significantly since Friday, in a subtle way, but a very significant way. On Friday, the line from Number 10 was Boris Johnson, when he appointed Chris Pincher as Deputy Chief Whip, the man in charge of Conservative MPs' welfare, he was not aware of any specific allegations about Pincher. Now, the word specific in that context was doing quite a lot of lifting. Effectively, what Number 10 were interpreted as saying there was he had been aware of general media reports and general rumours and speculation, but he hadn't been aware of any specific allegations, and therefore it was seen as legitimate to appoint him to that role. That has changed this morning. The spokesman, Boris Johnson's spokesperson, in the last few minutes, James, saying that Boris Johnson had indeed been aware of specific allegations, but only those that were in the past, only those that had been resolved or concluded was the phrase that he used. In other words, there were no outstanding specific allegations at the time of the appointment, and despite the fact that there had been specific allegations in the past that Boris Johnson was aware of, that was why it was deemed appropriate and indeed a good idea to go ahead and appoint him. Now, they were asked about what sort of qualifications had led to Boris Johnson to make that decision about Chris Pincher. The answer was he was already a government minister at the time. He had lots of experience in lots of roles and so on. But another bit of info, James, that's quite significant too, that report over the weekend that Boris Johnson had joked about this, had laughed about Pincher by name, Pincher by nature.
Yes.
That was very directly and very specifically put to the Prime Minister's spokesman this morning, and he said, I'm not going to comment on that. He very clearly declined the opportunity to deny that the Prime Minister had said it.
Quite an easy opportunity to deny, but of course the calculation, if he did say it, would be how many people heard him say it, and therefore how dangerous would a denial be at this point. Although politically opportune for the next 5 minutes, it could be something else that comes back to bite us on the backside by tea time today.
Well, the allegation was very specifically put to him. The answer was, I'm not going to comment on that sort of speculation. The next question, of course, from us journalists was, so you're not denying it? And there was no denial forthcoming. So make of that what you will.
Jinx, padlock 1, 2, 3. I want to ask you next about timetables, because obviously a desperate resistance to any notion of another by-election. An inquiry is underway. I was trying to remember who the last Conservative MP to be exonerated by a Conservative Party inquiry, but there are quite a few of them. How do you think this is going to play out?
Well, there's not just an internal investigation underway here, James. There's also a complaint, we're told, that's been made to the internal parliamentary grievance and complaint
possibly
system.
The police as well, it was reported, wasn't it, this weekend? Although that hasn't been confirmed yet.
We don't know about the police yet, but we are told that there is, and Downing Street alluded to this, an internal parliamentary investigation underway. So they will not comment on the specific allegations against Pincher until that outcome has been delivered, until that internal parliamentary inquiry has concluded. There was a slightly telling line, though, from the PM spokesman today, where he said, look, if these allegations are true, if they are proven, clearly we would not want somebody in government who has had allegations like that made against them. But on the actual specifics of what they've learnt from this, of whether there will be a review into government appointments, of where this leaves Chris Pincher, there's no answer. Even on the question of whether Boris Johnson thinks Chris Pincher should resign as an MP, the PM spokesman saying, well, that's a matter for Mr. Pincher himself.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Ben Kentish, LBC's Westminster editor there, pointing out it took about 2 hours today for what I described as a lie. If you don't follow me on Twitter, there's an advertisement. What I described as a lie shortly before coming on air has been proven to be so while we have been on air. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes further, actually, and that someone does come forward to say they heard him say the thing about Pincher by name, Pincher by nature, but I equally wouldn't put money on it. I'd say it was about a 52%, 48% chance, that, which leads us neatly back to Brexit. Keir Starmer's stance calls into question whether I would vote Labour again, James, and I always have so far. I think he's going to lose votes to Lib Dems from Remainer Labour voters. Yeah, but his calculation is he's going to gain more votes from former Leave voters who aren't ready to admit that they made a mistake yet. Tony is, James, I voted for Brexit, but not for this mess. We need to get back into Europe and blame the war in Ukraine. That's quite clever, actually, in terms of dark arts, of spin and what have you. Stability and security are needed now more than ever. I wish the Queen would use her power to remove this government and lock them in the Tower of London until they say sorry. I don't know that she has the second bit of power that you described there. And then the polar opposite, we know what we voted for, you arrogant idiot, is a text that's come in from somebody who voted for labour shortages, economic sanctions, higher than necessary fuel prices. I mean, I could go on, but I don't want to sound like even more of an arrogant idiot than usual. The point is they walk among us and they still exist. Some of them are in the cabinet, where they're reduced now to blaming the civil service for gravity. Sarah's in Nottingham. Actually, before I talk to Sarah, I do want to take a call from someone who really is cross with Keir Starmer for not going further, or at least unhappy. 03456060973. My argument is baby steps. This is the way forward. Get to a point where you can realistically claim that Brexit doesn't get any better than this, and then start the conversation about joining the single market. Your argument is no. If you haven't seen enough evidence already, then your point. Do you see what I mean? So there's time to squeeze you in if you really think he's missed a trick here and he should have gone further. Sarah is in Nottingham. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning. I've got two things that I actually wanted to, and one of them I'm dying to get off my chest. One of them was myself and my family lived over in mainland Europe for over 20 years.
Yes.
And as a result of that, we were not allowed to vote for Brexit, including a few million of us in mainland Europe.
Yes,
were not
it was an
allowed
odd one,
to
that,
vote
wasn't
for
it?
Brexit. But, 3 years ago, we moved back. So here we are, having to live with everybody else's misinformed choices, if you like. But that one I was dying to get off because, obviously people that are in mainland Europe who are still holding a British passport, and like us, we moved back.
I don't want to sound dismissive, but I'm going to. I mean, I know that, and I know it stinks, and I know it's horrible, but I was taking these calls 6 years ago, Sarah. I can't take them again. I feel your pain. I feel your pain, I promise.
I know, but Keir, I think, to be honest with you, Keir is having to play this a little bit more savvy. I think this is way too close to COVID. the global fuel prices, global supply chain, the Ukraine. I think if he was to go and say, yeah, we're going to go back to rejoin the EU, I think that's going to be a step too far for people, because they're not actually, in their mind, everything else has taken away the benefits that they would have thought they would have seen of Brexit, but they're not seeing the benefits of Brexit in their minds because of the damn COVID and fuel prices and Ukraine and global supply chain. That's all kind of muddied the water for them. So I think until things have settled down a bit and people can actually see that there's nothing else to blame on, that it really is a raw Brexit result.
When you can't
they're not actually going to see the pain, because while everything's being blamed on everything else, they're not actually feeling a Brexit pain, are they?
The only thing, no, well they are, but they don't realise it. So they've been kicked in the ghoulies, but they think they walked into a traffic bollard. That you can have that if you want, Sarah. That's for public use. The only thing you're left with, and I don't know how big this is, the only thing you're left with is the just a little more time argument. Because they will stick with it, some of them, and they are a really stupid and stubborn bunch, as you know. So you will have, particularly the ones who like to call themselves economists, they will claim, oh, no, there was always going to be short-term pain. We just need to hang in there for a little bit longer. So that's the only bit you're never going to be able to address with reality or diffuse with reality.
It is, unfortunately.
And I don't know how big that is or how many there will be or how effective that ploy will be. It makes you wonder whether Jacob Rees-Mogg might have actually said something intelligent for the first and only time in his life when he talked about it taking 50 years before we see any benefits. Because he won't be around to be held to account.
Until we've actually all seen the impact assessment.
Well, we're not allowed to see those. Don't be ridiculous.
No, of course not.
They're not for the peasants, not for the likes of you. So we're not allowed to see impact assessments. We're not allowed to see actual retrospective accounts of how badly it's gone, and we're not allowed to see forecasts of how it's going in the future. Because Jacob Rees-Mogg, when he says this, is hoping you're too stupid to realise that every budget that's ever been made by a British Chancellor bases his calculations upon forecasts. He wants you to believe that forecasts are a complete waste of time. And Sarah, lest I seemed a little dismissive, I am sorry. I think that was an appalling dereliction of democracy that people like you were not allowed to vote. But, there we are. Hi, James. I know you're not, but I'm upset someone just called you an arrogant idiot. That's very sweet of you, Maher. But, I work with him every day. And he has his benefits, particularly during Mystery Hour. 12:44. Michael's in Greenford. Michael, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Michael.
I think Starmer's made a big mistake, a really big mistake.
Go on.
Because we all know that things are going to get a lot worse. And a lot of the people who would have voted for Brexit because they didn't know any better or they were fooled are going to start feeling the pinch. And they're going to look for somebody to blame. And they're not going to be able to blame COVID anymore. They're not going to really be able to blame Ukraine. And they're not going to be able to blame the last Labour government, etc., etc.
They might try.
Well, they might try. But I think people are going to think, well, this is not what we wanted, and people are going to really hurt and they're going to be really angry. And I think public opinion will turn very quickly, and then Starmer's in a position where he's high and dry because he says he wants to make the best of this sinking ship. So what's he going to do then?
He's going to bail out quicker than anybody else did and admit that there's a hole in the waterline, but that it's a hole that we have to live with because that's what people voted for. I don't know that everybody is going to admit. You said we all know that things are going to get a lot worse. First of all, I don't think they do. It's impossible to tell the difference between the delusional and the determined, the dumb or the people who just don't understand anything, or the people who just can't quite yet let go of the carcass. But I don't know that I agree with you. The calculation is that it would not be electorally successful, electorally advantageous to pledge to any form of joining anything at the moment. I think he's right, Michael. I really do.
But people are actually going to feel it. And they're going to, I
know they are, but they're not going to believe that it's Brexit for a while. They will eventually. That's his calculation, but not yet.
Don't you think the papers are quite likely to turn? Because it's a question of selling papers, and if the selling papers is what a disastrous mess the government's made of Brexit or whatever...
But then who are they going to blame? They're not going to blame Brexit. They're going to blame the implementation of it. And that's Starmer's calculation, is that he will promise in the short term to do a better job of implementation. They're never going to blame, but you don't. I mean, the Daily Mail's never going to turn around and say, "Look, we're really sorry. We should never have encouraged you all to vote Brexit." It's never going to happen as long as we live.
I agree.
So against that backdrop, what do? We promise that we're going to do a better job of implementing this thing that everybody wants. And let's not have too deep and lengthy a conversation about what a stupid idea it was in the first place.
But there is no way of making better of it.
There's a couple of areas of possible improvement. That's why I'll be interested in seeing the speech. There's a couple of things you could do that the European Union have already signalled a desire to do. The problem is the DUP won't wear it, as you know.
Yes, indeed. And the problem is that we put two fingers up to the EU. It's almost impossible for any small business to export to the EU these days. A lot of medium-sized businesses also. So we've lost a great chunk of business, 15% of our sales to the EU already.
Yep.
And if we don't make that up, we're that much poorer.
I know. And also, of course, I mean, on the softer power side of things, we've shown any future signatories to trade agreements or any form of internationally but legally binding international treaties, we've shown them that if we've signed it, it's not worth the paper it's written on. Or at least if Boris Johnson has signed it, it's not worth the paper it's written on because he'll be trying to tear it up 10 minutes later. All true. Time, I think, for a bit of intervention from Peter Foster of the Financial Times, who's been he's been like a shepherd, a guiding light through some of these murky waters. And I don't know what he thinks about Starmer's imminent intervention, and I'm very keen to find out, which we will do after this. It's 10 to 1. There's also a rather good thread I've just stumbled across by a professor of psychology that hopefully we'll have time to refer to before Sheila time. But Peter Foster is on the line, public policy editor at the Financial Times, also, of course, the author of the Britain After Brexit briefing blog, which is agreeably alliterative, if nothing else. Pete, can you give us a quick idiot's guide to what we think Keir Starmer is going to say today, please?
Yep, he's going to say that it's time that we stop banging our heads against the brick wall with Brussels and took steps to normalise our relations. And he's got a 5-point plan, James, to do that. And that starts with fixing this row over the Northern Ireland Protocol that you and I have talked about a fair amount. Mm-hmm. And then doing some things to try and ease trade flows. So among those, a veterinary deal that would make it easier for our food exporters to get their food into Europe, because right now they are trussed up in what he calls rather imaginatively a fatberg of red tape blocking the arteries of trade, and also some other bits and pieces, including a thing called mutual recognition of professional qualifications, which is to make it easier for our architects and accountants, etc., to do business in Brussels. So, steps to try and lower the temperature politically, and then some practical steps to make things better on a trade front.
Now, there is a temptation, and I suffer from this, which is why you're here, because you don't, to look at everything from the UK's end of the telescope. Of course, that all sounds perfectly sensible and desirable from a UK point of view, and even objectively from an EU point of view in some ways, except it presumes that they have in any way got our interests at heart. I think it was you who said earlier today, the idea that Starmer's going to get brownie points simply for not being Johnson is a little bit naive.
I think that's right. I mean, listen, I think there's two things here. I think even the Remain caucus, as it were, never really understood that the EU, right from the get-go, took a very strategic view that the single market is the thing that makes them unique, right? This single block of regulations that mean you can send a truck of bangers from Brussels to Barcelona to Bonn to Bratislava without let or hindrance is really important to them. And they were never going to give us any freebies into that market. So even, as you say, even if we're nice to them, they're not going to do that. So that makes it quite difficult to get some of the kind of remember cake, having your cake and eat it, cakeist demands. Well, there's a bit of this Labour stuff which is kind of cakeist, right? And it's not the EU being mean, it's just them defending their interest. That market is more valuable to, and they're not going to dilute it. That said, James, if we can stop this endless fighting, for example, over Northern Ireland, we might be able to participate in what they call as the Horizon Europe 2020, £95 billion worth of science collaboration, which we're being cut out of at the moment, which we actually agreed as part of the trade deal. Yes. But the Commission has just said, if you're not going to honour your agreement on Northern Ireland, you can't
pick and choose the bits about the trade deal that we agreed on that we're going to hang on to and then jettison others. I mean, it's being a bit underreported, but it's causing huge ructions in scientific circles, which even if it does get fixed, some of the damage done will not be reparable because research projects will have moved to other countries in order to...
Well, no, that's right. I mean, these things move on. I mean, this is the thing, there's a time limit here. So even supply chains, if you can get your stuff more easily from Italian or a Spanish company and you're in the German Mittelstand, you will do that. And then even if the UK decides to, for example, go for the Norway solution, which I don't think is politically sustainable, but say that it did, if that happens 5 years from now, that's 5 years of businesses making their own arrangements. And so, I think there is a kind of limit, depending on how long Boris Johnson and this current, gang of Brexiteers is in power, there's a limit to how much you can fix things. Now, again, there's also trade-offs. So if you're going to do we talked about a veterinary deal. He doesn't specify what kind it is. If it's a Swiss-style veterinary deal, that might make it very difficult to do a trade deal with the United States, because the United States don't want the tyranny of EU regulations blocking their hormone-raised beef and chlorine-washed chicken from the marketplace. And you start to see that, there are trade-offs. So if you want mutual recognition of qualifications and industrial standards, then you have to accept a lot of alignment, a lot of EU law. And we know that that's actually what caused a lot of the Brexit problem. So there are still trade-offs, even in a Starmer world.
And so the best case scenario is incremental improvement upon what we've currently got, with possibly a couple of big wins in areas like Horizon, which won't necessarily translate into tabloid newspaper headlines.
Correct. I mean, that is it right there, right? Assuming we're not going to rejoin, which politically seems completely unsustainable.
Why do you say that? Because some of my callers disagree. And I know that I'm putting you on the spot a bit there with a personal opinion, but I'm interested to know why you think I agree that it's politically unsustainable at this time.
If you look at the last 20 or 30 years, where everyone has been told that the EU is making us, soporific and sclerotic. I mean, that's actually not true. Actually, the EU made us more productive. Exposing your economy to advanced economies on your doorstep makes you more productive. Our economy was actually more closed before EU membership. But the political narrative is so strong, it seems to me unlikely. And this is why Starmer in his speech today says, we're not rejoining the EU. Why does he say that? Because he doesn't think he can sell it politically. Yeah. My opinion is neither here nor there. Sure. I think
that. It's very interesting.
I just think it's a hard sell, and therefore
I do too. Impossible sell in the country we currently live in, and that's the only country where Keir Starmer is seeking to govern.
But things can be better.
Yes,
as you say, can be better.
And we shall watch with interest. And in fact, it's not cast in stone what the European Union's response will be in some of these areas, but whether they'll bother responding to policy proposals. Actually, final question, will they bother responding to policy proposals from a man who may not even be in the post he's in now by the end of the week? Would they bother engaging with that normally, Pete, from your...
I don't know whether formally, but I suspect you will start to see
noises,
comments from officials and diplomats in Brussels saying, well, you know what, it wouldn't hurt if we had a negotiated solution on Northern Ireland. And as you say, it's not clear. Some of the things that they have said are impossible in the current environment. Who knows what might be possible with the right lobbying from member states? We don't know. Let's start with the goodwill first and see where it leads us, might be my advice.
Indeed. Peter Foster, many thanks indeed. Policy editor at the Financial Times and author, as I keep reminding you, of that brilliant blog. A weekly blog on the sort of post-Brexit situation. Because, look, the facts aren't going to go away, however much some people wish they would. You can stick your fingers all the way down your lug holes and close your eyes forever, but when you open them and take your fingers out again, the world will be the same and the facts will not have changed. Quick thread, I hope I've got time to get through it before Sheila. I'm seeing a lot, this is from a professor of psychology who has a separate Twitter account for his political pontifications. It's rather good. He's called Richard Bentall. I'm seeing a lot of despair amongst Remainers, rejoiners at Labour's current stance on Brexit. I think this despair is misplaced and that we are already on the path to rejoining. It's just that nobody wants to talk about it. It's important to understand the path. It has stages, each of which must be completed before the next. Number 1, denial. 2, acknowledgement of harm. 3, attempt to mitigate within existing arrangements. 4, seek new deals, something like Norway. 5, finally rejoin. The UK is clearly now out of stage 1, denial, and into stage 2, acknowledgement of harm. Labour's current stance is 2.5, but it dare not progress much ahead of public opinion. Importantly, they don't even need to understand the path, they just need to want a fix. So the implication is clear. Keep the faith, keep doing what you're doing, keep calling out the harms. Even if Labour can't do it, there's no reason why we can't talk about rejoining. Everything is on our side. Demographics, the arguments, the experiences of ordinary people. The best case for reversing Brexit was always going to be its implementation. Revolutions end when ordinary supporters lose faith and ordinary Leave voters, not noisy Brexit ideologues, are quietly losing faith. I can attest to that from my switchboard and my inbox. This will be like US prohibition, a permanent constitutional change reversed after 13 years. I don't know whether this is good news or bad news, but it suggests that we're on track to rejoining in the early 2030s. And that, I would add, is why contempt for the con men, compassion for the cons remains crucial. I'll be back tomorrow morning at 10. Here's Sheila Fogarty. 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 Morning at 10. Here's Sheila